CIA, the FBI, and the IRS. Do you hold those same positions?
Yes, I do, because you know, most of our history we didn't have those institutions. The FBI came in during the First World War, and interestingly enough, one thing that Woodrow Wilson did, he used the FBI to spy on American citizens and actually arrest them if they disagreed with his foreign policy about going to war in Europe. And isn't it interesting how recent they used it in the Vietnam era? Democrats used it there. Republicans used the FBI to spy on 100 different groups in this country, including the churches, who disagree with the policy in Central America. It almost looks like the FBI was designed to spy on Americans who might be disagreeing with policy, especially the foreign policy. So the FBI, although I don't think I can condemn everything they've ever done, because I'm sure some of the investigations and investigation of crime has been beneficial, but that could be accomplished through Justice Department within our states. We wouldn't reject that portion of it. But I think the FBI has kept and continues to keep a lot of records on a lot of individuals. The CIA has only been here since 1947. Their record is lousy. I mean, just think of the CIA used by the Democratic administration to murder Diem and escalate the war in Vietnam. And here we have a Republican using the CIA to sell weapons to the Ayatollah, to raise funds, deal in drugs, go to Central America, fight wars that have not been approved by the people or the Congress. So we see the CIA as very, very detrimental, skirting the law. And here we had Casey proposing a super CIA. He thought there was too much control over the CIA that existed, that congressmen now occasionally ask questions, and they don't ask enough. So they were talking about a super CIA. The CIA was used in a bad policy in Cuba. We think that intelligence gathering is permissible to defend this country. But up until 1947, it was done as a military operation. If you needed to know whether there were troops massing for an invasion, that the CIA ought to know about, or we ought to know, get that information, have that intelligence. But now in this age, especially in the modern age, I mean, we don't even need to have somebody over in Europe or in the Soviet Union. We don't even need to send powers in an airplane over Europe. We have satellites. You can practically watch an individual walking around on the street with the technology available. So I would say even modern technology has absolutely moved us into an age where we ought to become more modern and get away from this CIA operatives snooping around, actually causing a lot more trouble than good.
Does that include all these interventions and covert actions and surrogate mercenaries which we're using in Central America?
Absolutely. We would do away with that. But that doesn't mean that we would complacently say that we shouldn't have a national defense. If we're concerned about the spread of communism, one of the first things we as libertarians would do would be to stop the funding of the communists. You know, we're still sending money to the communists. Increased under the Reagan administration. It's unbelievable what we've been doing. But if there is a threat to our national security, rather than using these secretive operatives going around and murdering and picking and choosing our personal dictators that serve our banking and business interests, it should be done through the Congress. Congress should know about it. It's the people's money, and it's the kids' lives that are being dealt with. So therefore it should be open. If our national security is threatened, Congress ought to have a vote on it. Never secretly with the power of a president to wage war. That's a very dangerous thing to happen.
If you became president, would you abolish the Federal Reserve, or try to, since it's a constitutional question also?
Well,
and try to break the power of the banking system in the country?
We'd get rid of the Federal Reserve, but unfortunately it is a constitutional question, but it shouldn't be. The founders were rather clear. They authorized no central bank. They said we could not emit bills of credit, which is paper money. They said that only gold and silver could be legal tender, and the only monetary function that the Congress had was to mint gold and silver coins. So if we'd follow the Constitution, we would not have a central bank, and we would not have a fiat paper currency. We would have a gold or silver standard, or both. We believe that we should have honest money, which is a commodity standard. We don't believe in counterfeiting. We don't believe the individual can counterfeit paper and give it to people and say this is money of real value, but we don't think the politician and the Federal Reserve can do that either. We'd get rid of the Federal Reserve, and we think it would not only help the economy, what it would do is would help the people, because the people would save their money again, prices would be lower, interest rates would be lower, and we'd eliminate the business cycle. So the sooner we get rid of the Federal Reserve, the better.
What would you do about the deficit, this enormous deficit we have?
The deficit should be eliminated by one technique: cutting spending. You can't cut spending until we decide as a people what we want from our government. If we want welfare and warfare, the budget will never be balanced. We're going to have an economic calamity, and it's going to be very, very major. If we want some sense to our government, we should balance the budget. We should do it immediately, and it should be done by cutting, and it should be cut both domestically and internationally. We certainly can cut military spending, because a lot of the military spending has nothing to do with national defense. We do not have to sacrifice defense. I believe if we changed our policy, we could have a better defense, but we would spend a lot less money, especially overseas. Same way at home. There's too much welfare. We cut back on welfare. There's too much interest on the national debt. A sound currency would lower the interest payment. So we would balance the budget in media at a much lower level. I think it would be the greatest thing in the world for the economy.
Do you have a last statement you'd like to make for our viewers?
Yes, I would like to suggest to the viewers that you should look at your choices. I think this year you do have a choice. I think it's foolish to waste your vote. Voting Republican and voting Democrat is a pure waste of your vote. So if you want to vote for less government, if you want to say you're not satisfied with the status quo, then you have to vote Libertarian. If you stay at home, which many people are doing, they're staying at home these days because they are disgusted like we are, but they don't think there's much chance of changing things. But if you vote Republican or Democrat, it makes no difference whatsoever. If they like what they have, if they're satisfied with the status quo, it doesn't matter. But if you don't want to waste your vote, if you want to make your vote productive, make your vote count, come join the Libertarians, vote Libertarians, send a message, because even if we get 5 or 10 or 15% of the vote, we will revolutionize politics in this country for the next 100 years. And that's what we want to do. We want to set the stage for the 1990s when the Libertarian Party can be a predominant force in this country.
What's the Libertarian solution to the farm problem? Just free market?
Free market, get the government out of it. You know, under Ronald Reagan, the subsidies in 1980 were $10 billion a year. They've gone up to $26 billion a year, and there's just as many bankruptcies as ever. Prices are wildly fluctuating as ever. I think it'd be much better if we got rid of all the subsidies and gave the farmers steady prices and a sound dollar. Low interest rates, prices that didn't jump all over the place, which is a reflection of the dollar's value rather than just commodity values. Obviously, when there's a drought, prices are going to fluctuate more than others. But this whole idea that when farmers produce too much, we're supposed to subsidize them. When there's a drought and they produce too little, we're supposed to subsidize them. And now I hear there's an early frost coming. And now they're going to have to be bailed out for the early frost. You know, first it's overproduction, and then there's a drought, and then there's an early frost. I think the idea is wrong. I think it's bad economics, and morally it's wrong. I mean, I'm having a bad year this year in medicine. I mean, should I ask you to be taxed so that you can send me some money because I'm having a bad medical year, or somebody else has a business that doesn't do well? Sure, you can have sympathy, and if he's your friend or relative, you can help him if you want. But to be able to coerce a non-farmer to pay him because he needs something or wants something violates all concept of rights. Nobody can demand something and call it a right. Everybody has a right to their life and their liberty, but they don't have a right to somebody else's property, and they can't use the government to coerce in order to get it.
Well, what about the Libertarian Party? Can you tell us a little bit about what it stands for?
Libertarian Party is based on a firm principle of non-aggression. We all take a pledge when we join the party that we will never initiate force against somebody else. That is, you know, a pretty simple principle that everybody should endorse. It's a principle of what makes civilization. That is, you respect other people's life, you respect other people's property. Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not murder. It's that simple, and most everybody agrees to that. And the next question ought to be is, well, why should you be different than Republicans and Democrats if they tend to agree with that same principle? Well, we believe it's such an important moral principle that if we can't take somebody else's property and we can't hurt anybody or we can't intimidate anybody or threaten to use force, we don't think the government can either. But we see the government as the initiator of force to bring about social and economic changes day in and day out. I mean, they may not come up to our front door with a gun, and occasionally they do. But we know if we don't deliver our money and our records and do obediently what the government wants in order to give up our portion of our income through the Internal Revenue Service, the gun will be quickly at our door and we will be in prison. So it's the threat and the intimidation, and therefore they're transferring wealth, something that we can't do as individuals. So we as libertarians reject this whole idea of forcible redistribution of wealth, which is the welfare state. Same way in personal liberties. We apply this principle in the area of personal liberties, and although I might want you and think you should lead a certain lifestyle because I think it's good and right and moral, I have no right to tell you what to do. You know, if you want to live a certain way and I disagree, that's tough. You know, that's your choosing. That's the individual's choice, as long as you don't hurt somebody else. So the person has the right to his own life and his liberty, his own lifestyle, as with one special rule, that your lifestyle, the individual's lifestyle, can't hurt somebody else. So if you do things that I disapprove of, I, as a libertarian, am tolerant and I accept that up until the point of no injury to anybody else.
Now, I talk to libertarians or listen to them or view them on TV, and they're talking about government power all the time and abuse of governmental power. But I also see some libertarians, not a whole lot of them, but a lot of them also talk about corporate power as well. In other words, they're talking about power in general. There seem to be two types of libertarians.
Well, I think we have one type of libertarian because we all accept the same principle. I think it's more easily found that you have several types of Republicans and several types of Democrats because they're interventionists and they can intervene any way they want. But I think libertarians are pretty consistent in certainly condemning the power of government. I haven't heard a libertarian saying that we need more government or they're not a libertarian. But on the corporate power, I think where the confusion might come is corporate size, if it's gained by serving the consumer, is not necessarily evil. So if you have 90% of the car industry, for some miraculous reason or for some unknown reason, there's no imports. If you have 90% of it, that doesn't bother me as a libertarian if you have the best car at the best price and the consumers are very happy. Now, if you have 90% or 100% of a utility company and you're gouging the customers and the customers have no place else to go, we detest the corporate size. We detest corporate power when it's gained through government power, you know, government coercion. If it's a contract, the military-industrial complex is a pretty good example of how large industries benefit by big government. Of course, in banking, big banks benefit by this monetary system because they're sort of in collusion with the Federal Reserve System, so we detest that. We detest bigness and we detest corporate power when it's gained through privilege from government. If corporations are large, and there's always free entry in a free market, if they're large because they serve the consumer, we don't worry too much about that because we know the consumer is benefiting. If they get to the point, if they had 100% of an industry, which is not possible in a free market, but let's say, just for instance, if they had 100%, and then they started to gouge the people, there would immediately be competition. There always has to be free entry and free competition. But nobody's ever figured out where there's ever been a true monopoly in a free market system. All monopolies can be traced to some form of government protectionism.
Some libertarians are against the public school system. They would close down the public school system. Do you think this is a good thing, or do you believe in that?
Well, I don't think the public school system has a real good record. I think the educational quality is very, very low and getting lower all the time. I think that you can go to some of the big cities and you find out that the schools are drug infested and crime infested, and there's violence and very little education. More than 1 million kids drop out a year before they get their high school diploma. It's an armed fortress, and so we think the record is very poor. So we have concern about good education, and of course we want to go in the direction of privatizing all schools. But in the very practical world of politics, I don't think it's wise for me to say that tomorrow we could have private schools. I don't think it's likely to happen. So we can do a whole lot, set our ideals, work toward it, and we could change a whole lot. I think where we really have gone astray has been in this century, where we have gotten, in probably the last 30 or 40 years, when we got the federal government involved. And the local governments have been involved in schools most of our history. And I think if we had the federal government out of it and the state governments and schools were controlled locally,